day, friends. Welcome to Our Power is Within podcast. I'm your host, Chas Smith. My mission for this podcast is to inspire you to take your power back and realize that you are the healer that you have been looking for all along. For this week's challenge, I was thinking that we could all spend some time in stillness with ourselves. Maybe this is 5 minutes right when you wake up, or maybe it's 5 minutes before you go to bed, or maybe it's a pause in the middle of your day to just come back into your breath. Maybe you do this when you notice that you get caught up in thought or rumination or just a general feeling of rushing through life and you just want that moment of presence. Maybe you place your hand on your heart, maybe your eyes are closed, or maybe you're just eyes open, gazing out at something beautiful in admiration. Whatever it is for you, every day, just see if you can commit to a minimum of 5 minutes in stillness with yourself. So today's episode is a very fun one for me because I got to spend an hour or so chatting with my best friend, which this has been long in the works, and we finally made it happen. Our topic today is empowered birth. What does that even mean? How can we make more personal choices in our pregnancy and birthing experience? What would it feel like to feel empowered? What options do we actually have that might not be something we're familiar with? Sophia Henderson answers all of these questions and more today for us all. Sophia has known on some level since she was a young girl that she wants to be a part of the birthing process for women. And through the many years I've known her, I've watched her blossom into an absolutely inspiring midwife who truly cares about her clients and helps to create a safe space where they can be informed and then make their own informed choices for how to go about their pregnancy and birthing experience. She has so much compassion and care, is constantly doing research on all sides to weigh risks and benefits of different potential options, and in general, she's just a natural born leader in the realm of self love, empowerment, and personal responsibility. She's been one of the biggest contributors to my own personal relationship with myself, and she's inspired me in so many ways throughout our friendship over the years. And I am very excited to have her on this show.
All right, you guys, I have a really fun conversation that I'm about to have with one of my best friends in the entire universe, actually. One of my favorite humans, Mrs. Sophia Henderson. And I just want to welcome her to the show and say that I'm so excited for us to be having this conversation today. Thanks for joining me, Sophia.
We've talked about doing this for a long time.
Like a year now, right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's happening, which is really cool.
Yay.
Yeah. And so we are talking about empowered birth, which is going to be a very new topic for this podcast. Although I think that, like most of the episodes to date, there's been some concept of like self-healing and healing once you have maybe some chronic symptoms physically or healing things in the mind. But I am really passionate about personal power and people just in general taking their power back in whatever capacity that looks like. So I really want to expand and explore different areas and ways in life that we can take our power back. And so this is a really exciting topic to kind of break down and have you address for us today. So yeah, and as a little bit of background, Sophia is a midwife who really places an emphasis on empowering her moms in their birthing experience. So, Sophia, how many births have you assisted now?
Oh, I could tell you the exact number. 272, I think. Yeah.
So awesome. Amazing.
Yeah. Someone early on in my career when I was a student was like, keep track of how many births you've been to. You'll wish you had when you forget.
Yeah.
So I write them down in my calendar, in my phone, and I hit repeat every year so that way every year it comes up and I'm like, oh, wow, this is a really popular day to be born. I go to a birth, every other year on this day. So I get to remember the births as they come up each year.
And there's patterns, huh?
Yeah, sometimes
Trends.
there is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What inspired you, or what do you think is like the driving force behind your passion to really bring this element of personal power and empowerment for your moms when you assist them and guide them and support them through their, pregnancy and birthing experience?
Yeah, because I thought I was so prepared when I had mine, and I would do it so differently now if I had my children now. I thought through my years of training to become a doula and educating myself on patient rights and advocacy, and the idea that if you don't know what all your options are, you have none. I thought I had done that already and that there was nothing left to learn about that specifically. And then I was introduced to the concept of free birth or unassisted birth or family centered birth. There's a bunch of different ways you can call it, where some women are choosing it just as a first choice, and others are choosing it because they feel that they can't find somebody who will support them the way they want to birth. And maybe that means they want to try a vaginal birth after a cesarean and they can't find any medical provider who believes in that. So they just do it on their own. There's a few different reasons. Maybe it's a money piece. They financially couldn't afford to hire a home birth midwife, but they don't want to go back to the hospital, so they just do it themselves. And so I, learned about free birth and joined the groups and wanted to learn how I, as a midwife, could support these families and in getting birth certificates or showing up if they do have concerns and feel they, would like some medical support, but on their terms, and what that means for myself and my license. And it's been an interesting journey. But yeah, as a mom, I had my son at home, and my daughter by cesarean. And I still believe to this day, if I had stayed home with her, I would not have had a cesarean. So, but the choice didn't feel like it was mine. As licensed midwives in California, there are certain laws that our license says we can or can't do. And one of them is a dating law. So as a licensed midwife, you are allowed to support families between 37 and 42 weeks. And I went into preterm labor at 35 and 6. And so the question just wasn't even in my head, do I stay or do I go? I just went. Um, and I feel like if I had stayed, I wouldn't have had surgery. So those experiences really shaped me into who I am as a midwife today.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know we've had lots of conversations about, I thought I was going to do things one way, but then you live your life and you have an experience happen and you never really know until you're in it.
Yeah. So the thing I try to tell my families is 100% it should be your decision, because there is no like right way to do something, but just that like you were the one making the choice, and that you felt like you were surrounded by people who could give you all your options and remind you what all your options are, and then honor you in deciding what route you want to take, because you're the one that has to live with it forever. So why should it be anyone else's decision? And then on the other hand, I understand why doctors, midwives, care providers want a hand in the decision making, because the state of California sees us as the responsible party. It doesn't even matter if the parents are taking full responsibility. They see us as the responsible party. So there's this fear, and how do we serve families when there's this like threat to our license around how we serve them, and how to hold the balance between that, and is it even possible? That's the journey I'm still on.
Right. Yeah. Because you always, because like unfortunately, a lot of doctors they're kind of caught in this kind of bind where they know that their license is at stake, or they could be, sued for malpractice, or just different things that might influence the decisions that they want to make regarding a situation.
Yeah. And especially as a licensed midwife, usually as a nurse or a doctor, a lot of stuff has to happen for you to lose your license. Like, you have to be shown that, like, repetitively you are making bad decisions, and have horrible outcomes. As a licensed midwife, one thing happens and everything is reviewed for you. So it's just like even more sensitive for us
Wow.
to lose everything. But yeah, yeah,
So, okay. So let's talk about, you kind of briefed a little bit on it, but maybe just go in a little bit more depth for anyone who's listening, who might be thinking, well, what does empowered birth even mean? Like you already said, you want to support women to have like their decisions on how things go about, but what does that look like? Because some people I could see, as you said, like some of us don't know what's possible. We don't know what decisions we could potentially make. We don't know what options there even are to explore, because we kind of just get taught there's like this one way that you do things. You know, you get pregnant, you go to the hospital, or not the hospital, but you make a doctor's appointment, you go see your OBGYN, you get ultrasounds every so often. Like there's just this routine, there's a pattern that is just the general way that we approach pregnancy from early on all the way through birth. So yeah, I guess like explain it from your perspective and the perspective maybe of the majority of your mamas, what are the other options? Like what are the other paths and routes that future moms or potential like future parents out there could explore that they might not even be aware of are an option?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it all starts with storytelling for me, and that's why these podcasts are so important, to share stories and hear over and over again, like, she did it and she did it and she did it and she did it. You start to um, broaden your scope of like your village, because if you have a network of friends and they've all done it one way, then that's the only way how. So that's why these podcast birth stories are so great for families to be able to hear of, like, all the different ways of doing things. And so for me, yeah, basically it starts with the first visit with a family where I'm feeling out where am I meeting them? Like, where are they at in their journey? Are they already like, I don't want vaginal exams. Like, I feel really in tune with my body and my baby, because that's one family. But then there's also a family who's like, I don't really know what I want, but I had a horrible birth experience and I know I don't want that, and I don't know what else there is. And so trying to figure out where they are, meeting them where they're at, and just building connection and relationship. I spend usually about 2 hours at most appointments, just getting to know them and talking and sharing past birth stories that I've attended and witnessed, and then just seeing what perks their interest and what we want to dive deeper into. And I always just remind them that for most people, after you get pregnant, if you did nothing, you would just grow a baby and have a baby. Like that. It's the default for most people. It's the default that you would just grow a baby and have a baby, and that all this other stuff is extra, and can feed our soul, can feed our body. And there are things that are important, but really, like, how you take care of yourself between your visits with your care provider, if you have one, is actually your prenatal care, your nutrition and your exercise, and your mental health, and hopefully, ideally, you surround yourself with people who are contributing positively to that. For example, like when we talk about nutrition, which is usually every visit, at the first appointment, I ask them what their goals are for their nutrition. Instead of saying, you need X amount of protein and X amount of this, and you should be getting this in, I just try to see where they're already at and where they feel they need support around. And that's how we counsel their nutrition is, how are you doing on your goals that you're wanting to meet, and how can we support you to meet those goals? And the same to do with exercise and movement and their emotional health. And then every so often, I have it auto sent, set up in an email in a program I have, where every week a topic is dropped in their inbox that I've written about. Maybe it would be about vaginal exams and how necessary are they really, and what happens if we just didn't do any, and when might it be helpful, and all these things. It might be about meconium, like if we see meconium in labor, what does it mean? And it's not telling them what the answer is or what they should do about it, but just kind of like starting the conversation, and then that way we can continue it in person when we see each other. But yeah, just reminding them that really the default is no matter what you do, like you're just going to have a baby, and all the extra stuff is fluff. And if it makes you feel safer and more loved and more cared for to do these things, then let's talk about that. But if it's just like all the tests, if it's just stressful to even think about doing all the tests, then why not just skip them?
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying, and this is what I want to clear up for some people, is what's different from somebody who walks in the doctor's is they're going to be like told, this is what you need to do, this is when you need to do it, this is the schedule, this is, and all that. But what you're saying is that when somebody meets with you, you're more about providing information on what your options are, and then what their goals are, and then supporting them through that. Basically, that they don't have to follow the same protocol that we're used to experiencing for a lot of for basically our whole lives, like where we're used to oh, you go to the doctor, you do this on this timeline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for example, like gestational diabetes, we'll spend as much time as they want talking about it in the appointment. And again, our appointments can be up to 2 hours. And we talk about what it is, if they have any risk factors in their life or their family, the consequences for moms and babies if it is present, and the different ways you can test, and what it would look like if you didn't test. Like say you had no risk factors, and that was something that you just felt comfortable declining and not testing. And that the idea is, if you're choosing testing, it's because you want the information, not because it's a requirement for my practice. I don't have any requirements in my practice. The idea is that, do you want this information? Do you want to know if you have gestational diabetes? Because if you do, then we should test you. And if you're not concerned about it at all, then we can just totally skip it. That the information is for you, and I'm here to help maybe clarify what it means, the test results, and what it means for your baby. And like, for example, I have a mom right now with a thyroid condition that she wanted to test for, and it's present. And we gave her the option to go to an endocrinologist and alternative methods to treat it. And she chose alternative, and her numbers are improving. And so, whereas maybe another practice even would have just sent her to an endocrinologist because of like this liability piece, like, ooh, this is outside of my scope, but I could just be honest with her that this is not something that I know how to treat. I don't have the training. And let's hook you up with somebody who does, but the modality and the way you want to treat it. And for some people, they would have just gone straight to the endocrinologist. And it's not like one's right, one's wrong. It's just that, like, how do you want to support yourself through this process? And what are your concerns, and how can we find out more about that and make you feel safe?
Right. So I think the thing is, like, I know in my experience of even just witnessing and having conversations with people, is so many of us, I don't think we even realize we're giving our power away sometimes, or what that even means. And we just follow the plan that is laid out for us for whatever reason. One, like I said, some of us don't even know there are other options. We're not even at that point where we're aware there's a different path that could be taken. We're just doing what we were told and what we learned, and we follow it. But so as we're listening to this conversation, it could be this thought like, wait, you mean to say that I don't have to do all these things? And when I say these things, you kind of refer to it as like all the extra stuff is fluff. So could you kind of break down some of the things that in our culture we typically expect is a requirement that could be considered optional based on what a woman prefers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So start to finish, going to the hospital is totally optional. Having any care provider at all is totally optional. Um, Checking mom's vitals, blood pressure, peeing in a cup, drawing labs, optional. Ultrasounds are all optional. Um, any of the tests like gestational diabetes, GBS, checking for that, those are all optional. Having anyone put their hands on your belly and measuring your fundal height and your baby's position are all optional. Having anyone's fingers inserted into your vaginas should be totally optional. And yeah, going anywhere when you are in labor should be optional, and who you have support you should be optional, and newborn procedures should be optional, like vitamin K injections or oral, erythromycin, the antibiotic ointment for the eyes. There is a test called the newborn screen, where they lance the baby's heel, and that is, air quotes, required by law to perform, and it's still optional. There's a little signature box that nobody tells you about that you can just sign and decline. Um, that's optional, even though it's required by law. So literally everything's optional. You could just, if you wanted to, live your life and grow and have a baby and do absolutely nothing. This was a conversation I had recently with a friend who lived kind of far away from me, wanted me to support her, was not sure about the money piece. And she was like, well, maybe I will just have you come for labor and then I could just go to Kaiser to do all my prenatal care. And I said, well, what do you want from them for your prenatal care? Like in terms of tests? And she's like, well, yeah, I don't really want any of the tests. I said, so would you want, like, are you concerned about your vitals or listening to the baby? She's like, not really. I was like, why would you go then? She's like, because I'm supposed to. I was like, yeah, but you could also just not go. If you're not concerned about any of those things, then why would you go? She's like, I could just not go. And she did. She just lived her life, and I showed up and watched her have her baby, and that was the end of it. And I was like, look what you did, you know? And, you know, some people could be listening to this and could say, oh yeah, but like in my pregnancy, XYZ happened and I needed XYZ. And yes, sometimes things happen. I agree with those. I've seen those things happen. And for most people, for most healthy pregnancies and healthy moms and babies, you could just live your life as long as that makes you feel good. If you're sitting at home stressing about like, oh my gosh, I've never heard the baby's heartbeat, and that makes you concerned and worried, then that's actually not good for your pregnancy or your baby. So, you know, add in the things that help you to feel safe and secure. But just know that you're choosing it, hopefully, and that your care provider recognizes that.
Right. That's the big thing, is you're choosing it versus doing it just because it's what you're told.
Yeah. And like a lot of times I'll be counseling families prenatally, and we'll get to the part where we talk about newborn procedures. For example, vitamin K injection for the baby. And I'm like, you know, what do you know about the vitamin K injection? They're like, oh yeah, we did that last time, so we'll do it again this time. I was like, no, that wasn't my question. What do you know about it? And they're like, nothing. And it's like, no, you don't have to just repeat what you did just because you did it with one child. Like, let's talk about what it is and why it's considered necessary, and what alternatives there are, and what it would look like if you decided not to do it. And some families decide not to do it when they were just going to sign up for it because they did it the first time. And it comes across to me as like, why is nobody talking to parents about this? They're just doing it just because they think they're supposed to, and they don't even know what it's for.
Right. Yeah. Rather than like doing the research and then making their own conscious choice. But in the defense of people and families in situations like that, so it is sometimes hard to find the right information. You can read a lot of mixed messages. There's a lot of different misinformation. There's a lot of, you can go and there can be a lot of like fear instilled into you around things. And I mean, I'm sure you've probably encountered situations where people consider this approach negligent, like it would be negligent to not check all these things, to not do all these things? And how do you, I guess, like, what are your thoughts and on that? And how do you, I guess, eloquently explain or help somebody understand that it's not about negligence?
Yeah. Yeah. And to just briefly say too, I understand the families that, I mean, 9 months is so hard to come up with all this information on your own. And what sources do you trust? And especially if you're your senior care provider for maybe 10, 15 minutes and they say, do you have any questions? And you're like, probably, but I'm not sure. Versus having somebody say, let's talk for maybe even an hour on this topic, and how much you could get from that. So yes, I understand that a lot of people aren't getting the opportunity to have these conversations. And then in terms of your question, I mean, the bottom line that I try to tell families is usually people lean one way or another in terms of their parenting. Usually they feel like odds are good, everything's going to be fine. That statistic is 7 in every 100,000 babies. I feel pretty strongly that like my baby's probably going to be fine based on those statistics, and I feel comfortable declining or taking a watch and wait approach and just like see how things go and treat things as they come up versus like a preventative kind of measure. And then there's some families who are like, okay, yeah, that statistic sounds low. And also, what if it's my baby? Because then the statistic doesn't matter. It's 100%. I have one of those children personally who, odds are good this was not going to happen to him, and it did. So there's no like right or wrong, but like maybe those families are like, it's really not worth the risk to me, and that's the bottom line, is that it shouldn't be me saying everyone should have this because I need to keep my license safe and make sure that, everyone's doing the same thing to protect myself, to protect all the babies. Because if families are looking to me to make the decisions and they're saying, okay, vitamin K, do you think I should decline it or do you think I should take it? That is not fair for me to risk your baby's life. What if your baby is the one, and I'm like, you should wing it. You should just risk it. What are the odds? And then something horrible happens to your baby. I can't be the one to make that decision. So of course the care providers are saying, well, maybe you should just do it, just to be safe. So that is something that I'm constantly working with families on, is how to be the decision maker and how to take responsibility for your choices, for yourself and for your baby, because that's when the boundaries can be stretched, and that's when you can say like, you know what, I feel really comfortable stretching the boundaries here and declining this. And some families are like, yeah, maybe for something else I would, but not for this. It's not worth it to me. But if they look to me to go, what do you think I should do? It's always going to be error on the side of caution. If you just can't decide, like we should, maybe consider being better safe than sorry. So I think it's safer for families and for babies to practice that skill of responsibility. It's important for the rest of your life. And this is where it begins, is with birth.
You're saying taking personal responsibility for making the choice, making conscious choices.
Yeah. And recognizing like, you don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. Like nobody can promise you safety one way or another. There could be side effects to the vitamin K injection, like there is no safety in life, guaranteed safety. And so you just have to do the best you can with the information you're given. And ideally you're given ample information to make your decision. And some people are like, I don't need the information. I like fully feel it in my body and in my intuition, in my soul, that this is the right way to go. And some people need to do the brain work and need the statistics and the numbers. And, everyone has their process and does it a little differently.
Sure. Yeah. And unfortunately, like so many of us are taught to follow the experts, and we become disempowered, or we don't realize we actually have choice because we're always just taught that, well, we weren't the expert in that. And like these other people have all this education and experience that I don't have, so they should make these decisions for me. But I know like we're talking specifically about birth, but to me, when we take our personal power back and just realize we actually always have choice in any capacity on any topic, I think that just, I don't know, it feels really special. It feels like more aligned and supportive to live a life where we can recognize that we have choice, and that, I don't know, for me personally, like, I don't know that any other person, regardless of what education they have, will have more authority over like knowing what's best for me and my body. And so, and I think what I love about what you're doing is you're literally showing up and teaching these women that they actually just, that you're helping them step into their personal power and make these choices, and yet you're not like pushing them in, like how you said, if they don't feel safe about something, that they can make a different choice. It's about creating safety through the experience.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Now, why might a mom decline certain things, like let's say some things that we're taught just are routine? And I know a really big one is the ultrasounds. Like, how many, I think you know exactly, like generally speaking, in a general pregnancy, how many ultrasounds does a woman get when they go the typical route through the doctors?
Yeah, low risk, usually like 3 to 4.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the first one is usually like a dating ultrasound to see how far along you are based on fetal measurement. And then sometimes there's a follow-up one in the first trimester, closer to the second trimester, and to like confirm growth, basically. And to listen to the heartbeat, because they actually recently stopped listening to the heartbeat, at least around here in our area. They stopped listening at that first ultrasound to the heartbeat because they realized that it increases the chances of heart defect if you send that amount of high frequency waves to an embryo's heart in its early stages of development, which is awesome that they're discovering this and that they're pausing on that. And also, okay, well, what is it doing to everything else? You know, like we're recognizing that there are some harms, and most families are not being educated that there are some. So there's those two, and then there's the anatomy scan at 20 weeks to make sure all the things are where they need to be, and then a lot of times there is a ultrasound towards the end of pregnancy to confirm that your baby's in a head down position, because a lot of places will do cesareans for breech presentation, where the
Mm-hmm.
baby is butt or feet down. Yeah.
So then, okay, so 3 to 4. And then why might a mom, in your experience, decline certain things like ultrasounds? And is it common? Are there actually, like, is this a thing where commonly moms might only do it once or not do it at all? Like, what's kind of the common that you experience in the alternative world of empowered birth?
Yeah, for my practice, I'm not sure about other people's practices, but I find I could look at it closer, but it feels 50-50 for me, that there are like a set of families that are not doing a lot of scans, and maybe if they're going to do one, it's going to be the anatomy scan. That seems to be like, if they're choosing one, that's the one they're going to do. And other than that, most people don't do a third trimester. I rarely ever see that. Sometimes people will come to me having already done the dating ultrasound, and they, are establishing a home birth later on in their pregnancy. Yeah, so it seems to be roughly 50-50, and the decision making goes around. I just educate them on what we do know about ultrasound waves and how it affects the fetus. And what we do know is that it increases the temperature of the fetus, that it causes bubbles basically in the cells of the fetus and the embryo, and that when we remove the technology, everything seems to go back to the way it was, but we're left wondering, what does this mean? Babies aren't being born obviously misshapen. It's not as simple as, if you had an ultrasound, now your baby's missing limbs, versus if you didn't, where it could be like, oh yes, clearly this is causing problems. So it's a little more like Russian roulette feeling, where it's like, some studies show that the more ultrasounds you have early in pregnancy, the higher your risk of miscarriage. But Some people are like, but I had some and I did not miscarry. So it could be a little tricky that way. But there are some studies that show that there are increased risk factors with more ultrasounds. So some families feel like knowing that information feels like, okay, I don't really need these ultrasounds. And other people have the information and then decide that, it is worth the risk to them to just have one, maybe. And we talk about the benefits, like dating ultrasound. Some people are like, I 100% know my dates. I know exactly when I conceive. We've been trying for this baby. So then I say, well, then what's the point of the dating ultrasound other than, confirming the fetus is in the uterus and not in like the fallopian tubes. And so some people will skip that. And then it's just important to know too that ultrasounds statistically do not improve outcomes for babies. So studies don't show that the more ultrasounds you have, the safer it is for your baby. It doesn't improve outcomes. So it really is just for your information. And the risks of them, other than what I just talked about, are false flags, false reports of, we see a spot on your baby's brain. We're going to need to do a follow-up in 2 weeks. And what that does to a person, when you hear that information and then you have to wait 2 weeks just to find out everything was fine. That feels like that's important. And devastating to some people, to have had that experience. It can really rock.
Yeah. I could see that really kicking somebody into a conflict state and stressing them out and them spending like 2 weeks worried and nervous and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And the baby can feel that for sure, especially everything I'm learning with German New Medicine. Like we begin to feel everything in the womb. So yeah. We're already being impacted.
I was just, we do continuing education units every so often, and I'm doing one right now on fetal assessment in labor. And it says that the number one thing that influences the fetus's well-being in labor is mother's stress level, more than any other thing is the mother's stress level. So I assume it's that way for pregnancy. It must be, just how literally connected you are to your baby. And if you're making choices that are causing more stress than good, why are you doing that to yourself and your baby? And so that's
Right.
why I feel it feels important that it should be the mother making the decision, because who cares about her more than she does? Who cares about her baby more than she does? She's the one who cares about both of them the most, and she should be the one making the decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, sometimes if they are like, hey, if I don't do these things, I'm going to feel afraid. So then you say, great, then do them, because you don't want the person to sit there and be afraid and have stress.
Exactly. Yeah. I always tell them, if you think about it more than 3 times, let's talk about it. If you're just like dwelling on it versus if you're like, it actually never crossed my mind again. I'm not worried about this, clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if, I feel like there's probably a certain type of, in general, clients that seek you out, but in general, have you encountered anybody who like they really do want to take this personal power and they want to be empowered through their birthing experience? Like they want it, but yet there is still almost like this fear that they're not going to make a good decision or the right decision, or they're just like so afraid to make the decisions because they're not used to having that level of authority. Have you ever encountered anyone like that?
Yeah, it's a conversation I have with other midwives too, because they'll say, oh, well, I think you just have a different clientele, because my clients want the vaginal exam to know how far along they are. They want all these things. And to that, I'd say that a lot of my clients come to me feeling that way too. And it's through the education and, through the storytelling, where they decide that they want something different. But there are people who come to me that have a history of like anxiety, and these like mood shifts that like just it's really hard to overcome, and especially if they had like a past trauma from a last birth or anything like that. It can get tricky to to talk yourself out of the fact that it could, maybe happen again. So I know, like, personally, I chose to do an ultrasound with my daughter, an anatomy scan, solely because I felt like it was the responsible thing to do after my son had been born with a heart defect, among other defects. I, in my soul, like in my body, did not feel concerned about this baby, did not feel like it was necessary. And I felt like, ooh, like maybe there would be some judgment if I didn't, how irresponsible that would be to not like make sure this baby was okay. Um, and that's the reason I chose it. It was not for myself. It was how other people might see the act of me not doing it. And I feel like that can be an influence for some families, choosing to do things not because they feel like they want it or need it, but the fear of like judgment or like that it's the only right thing to do. So that's a piece I try really hard to have like no attachment to how somebody um, does their pregnancy in their birth, like what decisions they're making. Um, because yeah, how could we possibly know what's good for them?
Right. So really at the end of the day, it comes down to your approach is through education and storytelling and then asking questions to have the mother and the father, the personal family make the decisions that feel best for them. And then you support them through it without judgment.
Yeah, giving them enough time. I had a mom who she had a hospital birth with a shoulder dystocia, and she was having care at the hospital and felt like she really wanted a home birth and set up care with me and was kind of doing care with both of us. And every time she would leave their appointment, she felt like, oh God, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. The midwife at the hospital told her it was the top 5 scariest births she's ever seen in her whole life, and she should just probably have a C-section this time. And I would just give her plenty of space to talk about it and process it and remind her like nobody has a crystal ball, and they're trying to err on the safest side that they possibly can with a little risk to them as possible. And I have no idea what's going to happen at your birth. Like maybe it could be another traumatic experience for you. I don't know. I don't have the answer. All I know is that you were induced, you were laying on your back. It makes sense that could cause what happened to happen. And that even if you wanted that to happen again, it's impossible. Like all births are different. You're not going to have the same experience, and we're not going to be inducing you. You're going to have full range of movement. And you're going to have a different experience, and you're the only one who can just keep going towards what feels right, what feels safest, what feels good in your body. And you're the one that has to make the decision. And so because she was wavering on home birth or not, like what is the right choice for me? And she decided to stop having care at the hospital because she felt worse every time she left, and just continue on. And she had a beautiful birth in 4 hours with no issues. Yeah, her baby just came right out, not a problem. So she trusted herself, and she listened to her body, and she overcame her anxiety. And maybe not, I'm sure she probably still had anxious thoughts. You don't have to like conquer it to still do the hard thing, to do the thing that you feel is right.
Right. That's so awesome. Okay. I have like a million questions I could ask you, but I know we're limited on time. And I want to just really quick ask this one because I am really curious myself. You mentioned this really early on, and I've definitely heard this floating around. There's this concept and idea that if your first birth is a C-section, that you have to take that route every other time. That after you have one C-section, you can't have a natural birth afterwards. Like it's automatic, just like assumed, like, oh, you're going to have a C-section again. What is your experience on that? Have you seen the opposite happen where somebody does have a C-section and then actually has a really wonderful natural birth?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, it's called a VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean. And the idea was once a cesarean, always a cesarean, because they were worried about the suture line rupturing, which can be, catastrophic for both mom and baby if it happens. But that's the thing, that the risk of uterine rupture is actually lower than the risks of multiple cesareans, especially if you plan on having a big family, So like if somebody's going to have one other kid and they'll end up with 2 C-sections, that risk is not as high as if a mom's planning on having 5 children and they're all going to be C-sections. After that, like her risk goes way up with each cesarean of issues. So for some people, they feel more comfortable with what they've already experienced in the C-section, and they would rather take that risk. And for others, they decide that they want to risk a vaginal birth, because that's the thing, like everything has risks. Everything you choose could be, you could turn out totally fine and it could all be safe, and everything has risks. And so that's something that we would talk about in depth. What are the risk factors? What are the numbers? If that's something somebody wants to go with. And other people are like, I don't need to know all the statistics. I feel in my heart that this is the right choice for me. And that's how I'm going to make my decisions. But yes, I've even been at a birth where they had a vaginal birth after 3 C-sections. So yes, it's possible. And even special scars. I have a special scar where it's not just like the classical C-section scar, on your bikini line. But you could have like a T scar or a J scar, or, different types of incisions. And I'm in a group on Facebook where people share their stories of their scars and if they were able to birth vaginally, if they had a rupture, because ruptures do happen sometimes, even though it's very rare. So it gives people hope, these storytellings, like it is possible, and I am really willing to risk it. I want to try for this. That it's, should be the woman's choice always.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so what options do women out there have who maybe, like I said, like we kind of the theme we've talked about, sometimes we don't even know what our options are.
Yeah.
You just learn you're pregnant, you just know you go to the hospital and you have a baby, like at the hospital. So what are some of the options that people have aside from going into the hospital? Because I know when they work with you, there's so many things like in terms of the way that they can present or visualize or create the actual day of the birth. So what can that look like for somebody?
Yeah. So I would say if you like statistics, if that's how you you use your brain to make your decisions, which is totally fine too. A good place to start is evidence-based birth. And I can send you the link, Chaz. It's a nurse who takes a topic and just like breaks it down for years and looks at every single study that ever existed on the topic, and writes about very in-depth articles. And she also has a podcast on all the topics, like, for example, vitamin K. So if somebody wants to make their decisions around having all the information at their hands, and then maybe sitting with their intuition after they look it over, and decide, that can be really helpful in deciding how you want to progress with a certain topic. So that is a really great resource. I love the Free Birth Society. It's a podcast, because I think it just shows how simple birth can be sometimes. These are unassisted or family-led births, and it can just give you that aspect of like, wow, she just had a wild pregnancy, meaning she just kind of lived her life and took care of herself, and she just had her baby, and how beautiful. And maybe that's not for everybody. It definitely isn't for everybody. But to know it's out there and that women are doing it over and over again can be nice to know, that it can be that simple.
Okay, so these are some resources: Free Birth Society podcast and evidence-based birth.
Yeah, I think that those are some great resources, so that you can, sit with yourself like, yeah, do I want to do this on my own? Do I want someone to walk with me through this experience? And is that just going to be my girlfriend, or am I going to hire somebody? Like, where do I feel safe? And like finding somebody that I can trust, somebody who is going to let it be my decision. And sometimes that can be tricky. Sometimes there are providers who are like, yes, 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 whatever you want. And then when it comes down to it, they're like, oh, this is happening and we really need to do this, and can kind of fall into scared tactics. And
Yeah.
when you're in labor, you're really vulnerable. And I walked into the hospital super cocky, like, watch me show them how this is done. And I was in a C-section before I knew it. And I was like, what just happened? It's so hard when they start talking about the health of your baby and the risks you're taking to like feel strong enough to say no to things. It really is hard. So the best thing you can do if you choose to have a care provider is finding someone that you feel you really can trust, and talking to other people they worked with to find out how it really goes down when you're in the thick of it. And finding out what they won't support, in terms of the laws. Every state has different laws on what licensed midwives can support, and what happens if my baby's breech, just so that you can decide if that's something that you want to continue with or not.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you also have a podcast too that people can use as a reference.
Yes. Our podcast is called Born Wild, and it's geared towards, our idea when we started it was geared towards other birth professionals who are also questioning, how do I show up for families the way I want to, without putting my license first? Like, how can I have this license but still show up in the way I want to show up, and honoring, parents' choice to choose. So
Gotcha.
yeah, and like just questioning things like, why are we doing vaginal exams? What is this actually helping?
So dialogues to just like really practice like learning and expanding and learning from each other, and
Playing devil's
challenging
advocate.
like status quo. And
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of families that birth with us will share their birth stories and their experiences. And then we also interview birth professionals around the world who are also questioning these things.
that's so awesome. Thank you. I'm going to put links to all this in the show notes. Now, a question that I was asking earlier, those are all great resources, but I was really curious like about what alternative actual birthing processes people have in terms of, if I'm a woman and I'm pregnant, all I've ever known is like, oh, you go to the hospital and you have a baby at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
But like, from being your friend and having so many conversations with you, I know that, well, as we've kind of been talking about, you can actually have your baby at home.
Yes.
And not only can you have your baby at home, you could like catch your own baby.
Yes.
You could have a baby in any capacity at home. Like, I know you do a lot of like tub births, but there's probably other ways too. So what are just some of the general ways that women choose to give birth that are alternative to the hospital, just to give anyone who's listening just even insight into what's possible?
Yeah. So there's birth centers, and the birth center can either be attached to a hospital or be completely independent of a hospital. And then you could have a home birth. I've seen hotel births. I've seen Airbnb births. I've watched a woman give birth in a sweat lodge. You can have a birth outside. All you really need to do is have enough room to open your legs and your baby can come out. It doesn't matter if it's on the toilet or in the shower or in a tub, or what's that like Dr. Seuss book, like in a boat or on a train or in a plane or with a fox or with a dog. Yeah, you could really just have your baby anywhere, and that honestly will happen. I just was reading a story on Facebook of a mom driving her 3 kids in a car, and she was like, oh my God, I'm going to have this baby. She was having some contractions, and she pulled over and squatted in the grass and had her baby and drove her and her children home. And her midwives were waiting there when she got there because she had let them know, like, I'm having contractions, I'm heading home. Yeah, and they like picked grass off him, and
Oh my goodness.
like you could just have your baby, So the biggest questions are: is where do you feel safe having your baby? And those are kind of the options you can choose from. And who do you want to surround yourself with? Is it just your family? Do you want to be alone? Do you want a midwife with you? Do you feel safest with a surgeon? How do you want to have your baby? And then a lot of people too can hire doulas who are kind of doing what I'm doing, but usually they're hired. You can totally have a doula for a home birth. They're amazing at home births. And a lot of times people hire them for hospital births. because they're kind of like a patient advocate, and they'll help you know what your rights are and what all your options are, and help you build like a birth plan to show your care provider when you arrive. Because sometimes you don't even know who your provider will be when you show up. It's just whoever's on call. So you have this like written plan, almost like a written contract of what you do and don't want. And they'll help you walk through all those topics and figure it out together.
That's so cool. How often do you have your moms? How often do you think that your moms that do home births end up kind of catching their own baby?
The last time I caught a baby was not this last December, but the time before that. And that was when I was starting my questioning of that, because she was on hands and knees over the bed and I caught the baby, and I did not need to catch the baby. And I think it's so important to catch your own baby. There was a NICU nurse who just had, no, not a NICU nurse, a labor and delivery nurse who had her third baby at home with us recently, her first two in the hospital. And I told her that I usually don't catch babies. And she was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll do that. She wasn't super attached to the idea. And she caught her baby. And later she was laying in bed and she started crying. And she said, I had no idea how important it would be to catch my baby. And now she swears that I've ruined her and she can't go back to work. Because every appointment she's like, yes, I want to decline blood pressure check. And I love that I can decline that.
I was gonna say, see, like, how many women are just like, oh my God, this was amazing that I could actually do that.
Like, yeah. I mean, I caught my son, and it was the most incredible moment of my life. Yeah, and I remember because my dad was recording, and in the video, you hear him say, like, "You just did that whole thing. You just did that whole thing by yourself." I was like, "Yeah, I did."
So awesome. Okay, we're gonna have to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask just last question, what is just your overall arching advice for anybody who's out there who, is listening and they're just like, I didn't even know what empowered birth was till today. I didn't know I had options, or just what are you really passionate about that you want to share as your kind of final message with anybody who is listening on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, really, the difference between like fear and intuition. Fear comes across as like a big story for me. It's got a lot of dialogue with it, a lot of explanation. And for me, my intuition is matter of fact. It is to the point. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's just this like gut feeling, or just this like, nope, don't do that. And no explanation, no nothing. And I just have to be like, okay. And maybe I can't explain why I'm not going to do this, but I'm just not going to do it. And every time I've listened to that, I have not regretted it. And I think that that's just an important thing to fine tune in yourself, is how to tune out everyone else's stories that are causing fear, because fear is not the same as intuition.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. That's such a good point. Thank you. And how can people connect with you if they wanted to reach out to you or just learn more or stay connected?
Yeah, my website is Sophia Birth, and Sophia is SOPHIA.com. And then Instagram, my handle is Sophia Birth, and Facebook won't allow me to change my name. So it's Sophia's Special Deliveries.
All right. Well, thank you so much, friend, for being here with me today and having this super fun chat on everything empowering about birthing and babies and pregnancy. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to share this one.
Yeah, me too. This is going to be on my podcast too. It's a win-win.
Yay!
All right, friends, that's a wrap. Maybe you already have kids and you don't intend to have any more. Or maybe you have friends or family members who still plan to have babies, and then you can pass this episode along to them, because you never know what they might discover is possible that was previously an unknown. Also, if you have your own message of empowerment or healing and would like to share it on this podcast, or maybe your own personal story of how you took your power back in your life, please reach out to me and let's have a chat. Most importantly, if you have found value in this podcast over the past couple of years, please remember to take a moment of time and leave a review on Apple Podcast, a 5-star rating, or share your podcast or share this podcast on your social media. Comment on the IG posts and help me spread the word. It takes a tribe, and your support is always greatly appreciated. Now, I hope you go give yourself the gift of stillness and make this week great.